The following is a recording of a presentation entitled Personal Perspective Running Up That Hill by Tonia Hymers.
Okay, so our last speaker before lunch is our lovely clinic liaison officer, Tonia. I think most of you know her already from the clinics or from the society. But before those responsibilities, she is a mother of two lovely boys, and she's going to talk about running up that hill.
I'm going to try. Is everyone hear me okay? Yes, I'm talking about my Dan the man now. Another Dan we have. Daniel came into our world on the 11th of July 96. He was the most beautiful little slip of a thing with shocking red hair. Louder? Sorry. And my husband has black hair and I have brown hair, so of course I had to put up with the endless jokes about the mythical ginger postman. So after a roller coaster pregnancy, I was relieved to finally hold my little man. But to my confusion, Dan had one extra little finger, perfectly formed, and although we didn't know it at the time, it was the start of his and our BBS journey. We were fortunate that Dan was diagnosed at around 10 months old. His failing kidneys were picked up at around 5 to 6 months, and other symptoms were noted at the same time. He had that perfect little extra finger, and he was a rather chubby baby. Many tests followed at Great Ormond Street, and eventually I wrote to the consultant and said, "I know you're looking for something, what is it?" So a week later, a letter dropped through the door. "We think your child has BBS." There was no explanation of what BBS was, and in those days, no internet. In the local library, I found a book explaining the symptoms in out-of-date and brutal terms. Time stood still a bit. We knew about the kidneys and the extra finger and the weight issue. However, the potential learning difficulties and visual impairment was a shock. We went straight to my GP, who apologetically got out the same dusty old book. But it so happened we had an appointment with a genetics counsellor the next day who told us a bit more about the syndrome and the society. She advised us that the society probably wouldn't be our cup of tea, as only the very badly affected tend to use those groups. And she also advised us that should we have another child, second ones tend to be less badly affected than the first. And this was, of course, before the BBS clinics. And thankfully, the information and support that we have now is fantastic. We ignored all her advice and made contact with Drina Parker and the LMBBS. After the wait to get pregnant and the roller coaster of pregnancy and childbirth, when things are not as they should be, it is important to allow time to grieve for the life we thought we would have and accept the one that we're living. Raising a child battling illness and disability is an incredibly intense experience, especially when there is delayed development. Every moment and milestone is so precious. As many young BBS parents have experienced, having a young child with disabilities tends to sort your friendship group out for you. It's hard to raise a baby with developmental delay, obesity, kidney failure, and visual impairment in close contact with other apparently healthy babies. There's too much comparison and too many competitive and sometimes unkind or thoughtless parents. I withdrew for a short time, and my parents cocooned us and provided the love and support that we needed to get through those early days of diagnosis and acceptance. They are our greatest cheerleaders, and we simply could not function without. Over the years, we got a grip. I need to get a grip on all things BBS. We accepted our lot, and we woke up to the fact that, BBS or not, very few families and people in life escape unscathed. But by the time Dan reached school age, I realised it's not about me. Of course, there's nothing like the pain of watching your child struggle and suffer. Sometimes it hurts too much. But ultimately, we can leave that behind and go out with our friends and our partner and recharge. Our children have BBS and will have to live with it for the rest of their lives. Our role is to be their parent, their friend, their advocate, and their cheerleader, and help them make their lives as good as they could possibly be. There's no one else in the world who knows our child like we do, and we have to take this on board and make ourselves heard. Maintaining good relationships with the key people in our children's lives is vital. We have to be an equal partner with medical, social and educational teams and believe that we're an equal partner, whether they do or not. We have to use the resources available to us to give our children the confidence, courage and self-esteem to know that they have a great deal to contribute to this world. Sometimes, though, this is easier said than done, and there are just too many hills. I was at the House of Commons recently for the Rare Disease reception, And an MP spoke very passionately about the delegates in the room who were all either parents or rare disease patients. She praised and thanked us all and asked us to keep pushing our MPs, to keep rallying and protesting and demanding to be heard. And this made me quite cross. Isn't it enough that we have to fight at a local level for our children to have access to decent health, education and social care, while at the same time cope with the demands of looking after our families in between hospital stays and appointments? And of course, we're not immune to the life events that affect everyone else. In fact, families like ours are more susceptible to illness, relationship breakdowns and financial hardship. I think one more glass of wine and I may well have started a revolution. Cool. As a family, we had 3 major worries when Dan was little: his weight, his eyes and his kidneys. Between 4 to 5 months, Dan ballooned from normal weight to clinically obese, and like other BBS mums, I spent the next X number of years and months and years explaining to all and sundry that I really wasn't overfeeding him. And at a BBS clinic, a fellow mum looked at Dan and said, "Well, your son obviously doesn't have the weight aspect of BBS," which is something I never imagined I would hear, as his young life was ruled by weight and diet. He was an enormous baby. However, we were strict, maintaining portion control and limiting treats to special occasions. Although he was always chubby, we managed to get his weight under control, and at around 15, he finally started shooting up and the excess pounds melted away. Dan has grown up with a conscientious attitude towards food, and he now manages his diet beautifully. The problem is still there, but it is scary how quickly the pounds can pile on over holiday times. When Dan was 3, his little brother Connor came along. Con was a gorgeous little boy, a ray of sunshine, and he and Dan were good friends. It was hard on him though, as it is for all siblings of children with illness or disability. There was no child on this earth more loved. However, he perhaps inevitably felt that Dan was more important, and his self-esteem suffered. We worked hard at getting things back on track, and it did take a while, but we got there. And Connor has grown up into a funny, loving, and typically moody teenager who loves his brother and is passionate about disability rights and the LMBBS. Over the years, Dan became increasingly unwell, and in early 2006, a viral infection put him on the path to transplant. Fortunately, we'd already started my workup, and on the 25th of July, my kidney was removed in the Royal Free, couriered across London and transplanted into Dan at Great Ormond Street. Dan was only 10, and he was incredibly brave. He was needle phobic, he had been his whole life, and during this period, he endured so many needles, cannulas and tubes with absolute courage. He was certainly braver than I. By day 2, Dan was off morphine and on paracetamol, using the PlayStation as a distraction. Meanwhile, across at the Royal Free, I was hyperventilating because the morphine drip wasn't working fast enough. I miss Dan and Con so much, but thankfully once Dan was discharged to the Great Ormond Street patient flat, we were able to be a family again. It was a tough few months, however we muddled through and came out stronger. Dan's kidney continues to do well. Once we'd all settled down after the transplant, the next worry reared its head: Dan's vision. Dan was diagnosed with retinal dystrophy at around a year old. Over the years, we settled into the routine of yearly checkups. And not long after the transplant, we had an ophthalmology appointment at our local hospital, and the consultant was quite frank in front of Dan. Although Dan knew about BBS and his vision, it was a shock for him to hear it like that. I think the transplant had taken his mind off the long-term implications, and he suddenly had to face it again. This was one of our more painful moments. Seeing that realisation hit home. Running Up That Hill is a song about swapping places. There have been so many times when myself and other parents like me have wished that we could just do that. We made our way home, all lost in our thoughts. When out of the silence, Dan pipes up. Horse walks into a bar. Barman says, "Why the long face?" We were laughing and crying. I think that was a bit of hysteria. And you could be forgiven for thinking Dan was a joker and a happy-go-lucky little boy, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Like many with BBS, he struggled hugely with his emotions. When he was little, emotional outbursts were a regular occurrence. The terrible 2s and 3s and 4s for a BBS child and parent are truly terrible. But this phase passed, and Dan learned to control his temper. However, the emotional difficulties remain, which makes it all the more remarkable how well he has coped with the various challenges over the years. But coped he has, adapting to the changes along the way. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I first saw him hook his finger over the cup to judge when it was full. It showed that his sight had deteriorated, but also showed a natural resourcefulness that would be invaluable. When Dan was little, I found the uncertainty difficult. we knew he would become visually impaired, but we didn't know when. And we knew he would need a transplant, but we didn't know when. I wanted dates in my diary. I wanted to know. I wanted to have a glimpse of the future and know that it would be all be okay in the end. I soon realised, though, that looking back, I could see that, yeah, it's painful and it's difficult, but we got through it. You can rely on the clock to keep ticking, and eventually it's over. The treats helped too. We had great fun with our caravan. We visited Legoland many times and Disneyland Paris, thanks to Dreams Come True. We also threw caution to the wind and remortgaged to take the boys to Disney World Florida and to Egypt, so Dan could fulfil his wish to see the tombs and pyramids. So where are we now? Dan has endured much in his 18 years. There have been difficult, ignorant teachers, bullies, endless medical tests and interventions. He's had to cope with understanding the condition he was born with and the implications it holds for him and his future. But during this time, Dan has kept his identity. He isn't defined by his weight, his vision, or by BBS. He's a bright, funny young man who grew up on Disney, Doctor Who, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Lego, computer games. He's developing an interest in politics. He loves ancient history and Miranda and QI and comedians in general, and he does not suffer fools gladly. And despite the many challenges, Dan has kept an eye on the future and has developed the drive to take him there. A failed sixth form placement gave him the determination to try boarding at the Royal National College for the Blind in Hereford, where he is studying IT, Braille and business. He's going to university in September to continue studying IT, and we couldn't be more proud of him. Dan is not alone though. I've met so many children, young people and adults who have BBS at conference and clinics over the years, and their bravery, courage and determination in the face of disability and illness is inspiring. I've also seen so much achievement within our group, whatever their passion, and we have successes in business, sport, in the workplace, paid and voluntary, music, art as well as academic, and there is a great deal that can be achieved. As a family, we were fortunate to learn this early on at our first conference when Dan was just 2 years old, which gave us so much hope for the future. We met Steve Burge and shortly after Graham Longley and Richard Zimler, and over the years more and more of you have shown us all what a great future our children can have. We have certainly come a long way since our first conference, and we owe a debt of gratitude to so many. So thank you.
This audio recording was taken live at the LMBB Society Conference in Northamptonshire, 18th of April 2015.